For 31 years, I cooked for people who were leaving. That was the whole of the work at Harrow Crossing, and I came to understand it as a kind of vocation, though no one would have called it that. Harrow was a way station on the dry plains of Vesk, a cluster of long sheds and water tanks, and a mess hall with a tin roof that sang under the dust, and nobody who passed through it meant to stay. They were refugees, mostly, families burned off one rim world or another, dock laborers chasing contracts, freight crews waiting out a storm season. They came off the transports gray-faced and hollow, and they sat at my benches, and I put something hot in front of them, and for 20 minutes they were not leaving anything. They were only eating soup. I had learned a long time ago that a bowl of broth could do a thing that no speech could do. It could tell a frightened person without a single word that they were still worth feeding, that somebody had stood at a pot since before light and stirred it on their account. People underestimate that. They think kindness has to be grand to count. I have ladled out more comfort from a dented pot than most preachers manage from a pulpit, and I say that without pride, because the soup did the work, not me. I was only the one holding the spoon. I tell you all this so you'll understand what kind of woman I was when the order came to leave. I was 63 years old. My knees ached in the cold and my hands had gone to leather, and I had buried a husband and outlived 2 of the only friends I'd ever made. And I had exactly one thing in this life that I was certain of, and it was this: you do not let a hungry creature go hungry while you have anything left in the pot. That was not a rule I'd reasoned my way to. It was simply the shape my heart had hardened into, the way a riverbed takes the shape of the water that ran through it for years. The order came down on a Tuesday, in the dry part of the season when the dust hung in the air like smoke that wouldn't settle. The transit authority man read it off a slate, standing on a crate in the middle of the mess so everyone could hear. His name was Holloway, and he was not a cruel man, only a tired one, and he kept his eyes on the slate the whole time because he could not bear to look at the faces. Harrow Crossing was to be evacuated. Every soul, every transport, gone within 9 days. There was a flight coming. That was the word he used, flight, the way you'd say a weather front. A great host of dragons moving in off the eastern reach. The Stormhold flight, hundreds of them, wing on wing, and their course ran straight over the plains, straight over us. Nobody at Harrow had ever seen a dragon. We knew them the way you know a thing from rumor. Enormous, scaled, old beyond reckoning, ruled by their own courts and their own mothers and kings, and not in the habit of explaining themselves to the likes of us. The authorities' reckoning was simple. A host that size on the move would not stop to ask who lived in the sheds below them. They would pass over, and if Harrow was in the way, Harrow would be cinders, and the only sensible thing was to be gone before the sky filled up. So the transports came, 2 and 3 a day, and I cooked while they loaded. I fed the families in the morning and watched them climb the ramps in the afternoon, and I kept the line moving, because a person about to be torn off the only ground they'd stood on for a year deserved a hot meal first. The kitchen emptied around me. My 2 helpers, the Tarn brothers, went out on the 4th transport, and they wept saying goodbye to me, and I told them not to be foolish. I'd be right behind them. I was lying. I think I knew it even then. I found him on the 6th night. The storm had come up out of the east the way they do on Vesk, fast and brown, the dust riding a wind that hummed in the tank cables, and I had gone out to the supply linta behind the mess to drag the last of the dry stores under cover before the grit got into them. The linta was half fallen already, the people who'd built it long gone, and I came around the broken end of it with my lamp held up against the dark, and I stopped. There was something curled in the corner, behind the flour drums, where the wind couldn't reach it. My first thought was a plains hound, one of the scavenger dogs that worked the way stations, and I nearly backed out and left it be. Then it lifted its head, and the lamplight ran along it, and I understood I was not looking at any dog. It was a hatchling. I had never seen a dragon, and I had never seen a dragon's child, and still I knew, the way you know a thing in your spine before your head catches up, that this was a young one of that great host. It was the size of a big dog, no more, and it was all wrong-angled and folded in on itself, the way young things are before they grow into their bones. Its body was scaled, not the smooth, pretty scale you'd put on a temple carving, but real scale, pebbled and overlapping and dull with dust, gray going to a deep dusk blue underneath where the grit hadn't reached. It had a long neck and a long whip of a tail wrapped twice around its own feet, and stubbed wings folded tight against its back, wings too small and too soft to be of any use yet, the membranes thin as a leaf held to a candle. Its feet ended in real claws, black and curved. And its face, I will tell you about its face, because it is the thing I remember best of that whole night. Its face was the face of something starving and frightened and trying very hard not to show it. The eyes were enormous, a pale amber, ringed and dark, and they were fixed on me, and the creature did not run and did not threaten. It only watched and shivered, and behind the shiver I could see it had decided I was the end of it and was waiting for the end to come. I have been frightened by ordinary things and not by that. I do not entirely know why. I think it was the shiver. A thing that means you harm does not shiver in front of you. It coils. This one shivered like a child left out in the cold, and whatever the rest of me thought about dragons and the host coming and the authorities' warnings, the part of me that had stood at a pot for 31 years had already moved past all of it to the only question that mattered, which was, when did it last eat? By the look of it, not in a long while. I could see the ridges of it through the scale, the way you should never be able to see the frame of a young thing. Well, I said out loud, because I have always talked to creatures and to pots and to the dead, you've picked a poor house to be hungry in. We're all leaving. The hatchling flinched at my voice and pressed harder into the corner. I set the lamp down on a flour drum, slow, the way you'd move around a hurt animal, and I crouched, which my knees did not thank me for, and I did the only thing I knew how to do. I had come out with a heel of bread in my apron pocket, the way I always carried something, an old habit from feeding the yard dogs. I tore a piece off and laid it on the ground between us and drew my hand back and waited. It took a long time. The storm hummed in the cables. The dust ticked against the tin. And at last, when its hunger had argued down its fear, the hatchling stretched its long neck out across the dirt, not its body, it didn't trust me with its body, and took the bread off the ground with a delicacy that undid something in me, a careful, frightened gentleness, as though even starving it did not want to frighten me back. There, I said, there, that's the way. That was the first bowl, in a manner of speaking. Bread on the dirt of a falling down lean-to, in a dust storm on the 6th night before the world ended. I went back inside and I did not sleep, and before light I had a pot of broth going bones from the stores, the last of the marrow, because a starving thing needs fat and salt before it needs anything else, and I carried it out to the lean-to in the gray of dawn, and the hatchling was still there, and it watched me set the bowl down, and when I had backed away the proper distance it came and put its whole face into the broth and drank like it had forgotten there was such a thing as enough. I called him Pip. I had to call him something, and he was small, and the name came up out of nowhere the way the right names do. He had no name I could ask after. He could not speak, or if his kind could, he was too young or too frightened, or it was not a thing they did with us. He made sounds, low ones, a sort of rolling murmur deep in his chest when the broth was good, and a thin keening when the wind came up hard, but no words. So he was Pip, and I was the woman with the pot, and that was the arrangement between us, and it was enough. The 7th transport left on the 8th day. Holloway found me in the kitchen that morning, and he had his slate under his arm and his hat in his hands. Which was how I knew he'd come to argue with me and not to order me. He was not a stupid man. "Etta," he said, "last transport's tomorrow at noon. After that there's nothing. No relief, no return run, nothing. The authority writes Harrow off the map at noon tomorrow." "I heard you the first time," I said. "I was scraping the big pot. 6 days ago on your crate." "Then you'll be on it." I didn't answer him. I scraped the pot. He stood there a while. Then he set his hat down on the bench, careful, and he said, quieter, "There's a thing in the supply yard. One of the scouts saw it 2 nights back and wouldn't come tell me till he'd had a drink. Said you've been carrying bowls out to it. So he knew. I'd wondered if anyone had seen. It's a young one, I said. It's half-starved and it can't fly and it can't have been more than a few weeks out of the shell. It got separated in the storm. They lose their young same as anyone does. It's not its fault its mother's host wants to burn my kitchen down. Etta, Holloway's voice cracked on it. That's the reason the host is coming this way at all. You understand that? They're not migrating. They're searching. A flight that size doesn't move off its reach for nothing. We've had word relayed down the line they lost a young one, a high one, royal blood, off the eastern storms, and they have torn through 3 waystations between here and the coast looking for it. And the word is they leave nothing standing where they don't find it. They think we took it. They think a human hand is on their prints. And you have got that prince behind your flour drums, and you are feeding it bread. I set the pot down. I will tell you that I had a moment then, where the whole shape of it arranged itself in front of me, and I saw exactly what I was standing in the middle of. A host of dragons, hundreds strong, grieving and furious, tearing the plains apart in search of a stolen child. A waystation in their path. And in the waystation an old woman who would not leave, and behind the flour drums, the very thing they were burning the world to find. I saw all of it. I am not going to pretend I didn't understand the danger. I understood it the way you understand a cliff edge, completely, in the body, all at once. And then I thought about Pip's face the first night, deciding I was the end of him and waiting for the end to come. And I thought about how he stretched only his neck out and not his body, careful even while starving not to frighten me. And the danger arranged itself back into its proper place, which is to say underneath the thing that mattered, which was that there was a hungry child behind the flour drums and I had a pot. Then I'd best keep him fed, I said, so that when they come, they find their prince fat and warm and not a heap of bones in my yard. Wouldn't you rather they found him living, Holloway? Or would you rather Harrow be the one-way station that let their child die of hunger 50 feet from a full kitchen? He didn't have an answer for that. There isn't one. You can't reason with them, he said at last. They don't think the way we do, Etta. They're not going to land and have a conversation. By the time they're close enough to see your kitchen, they'll already be diving. Maybe, I said, maybe so. But I'm not leaving a child to starve on the chance that the people coming for him are too angry to look down before they burn. If I'm wrong, and I'll have died with a full pot, which is more than most get. Now take your hat. It's a good hat. Don't leave it for the dust. He left the next day on the last transport, at noon, and he looked back at me from the top of the ramp, and I waved him off the way I'd waved off 1,000 leaving faces. And then the ramp came up, and the transport lifted, and the dust folded over behind it, and Harrow Crossing was empty of every soul but one. One and a hatchling behind the flour drums. I want to tell you what those days alone were like, because they were the strangest and in some ways the best of my whole long life, and I have never been able to make anyone understand them who wasn't there. The crossing was silent. I had never heard it silent. For 31 years it had been transports and voices and the clatter of the line, and now there was only the wind and the tank cables and my own feet on the boards, and at first the silence pressed on me like a hand. But a kitchen does not care how many it's cooking for. The work was the same. You build the fire, you set the pot, you tend it. And I found in those empty days that I cooked the way I imagine a person prays when they've stopped expecting an answer and keep on praying anyway, because the praying is the thing, not the answer. Pip got stronger. That was the joy of it, and there was real joy. I won't have anyone tell me there wasn't. By the 3rd day he would come out from behind the drums when he heard the pot. By the 5th he would follow me from the linta to the kitchen, a careful 10 paces back, his claws ticking on the boards, his stubbed wings half-mantled. The way I came to understand meant he was easy and not afraid. He was a dragon and he was alien. I never once mistook him for a dog or a child, never let myself sentimentalize the strangeness out of him. When he drank, His throat worked in a way no warm-blooded thing's throat works. When he slept with one eye lidded and one cracked, and the cracked one tracked me across the room. He smelled of hot stone and something sharper underneath, ozone, the smell the air has before lightning. His murmur, when the food was good, came up from so deep in him that I felt it in the boards through my feet before I heard it. He was not ours and never would be. But across the strangeness of him, plain as anything, ran a thing I knew as well as I knew my own hands. He had been afraid and starving and alone, and now he was warm and fed and not alone, and a creature that has crossed from the first state to the second will look at the one who carried it across with a particular softness in the eyes. That softness is the same in a dragon as in a dog as in a man. I have seen it in all three. It does not lie. He took to sleeping by the stove. I let him. The nights were cold on the plains and the stove held its heat, and he would curl against the warm iron with his tail over his nose and his cracked eye on me where I sat mending or dozing in the chair. And I would talk to him the way I talked to everything, low nonsense, the names of the things I was doing, old stories about my husband and the Tarn brothers and the leaving faces, and he would murmur back in his stone-deep voice, and we passed the nights that way, the two of us. The last living things at Harrow Crossing, waiting for the sky to fill up. Because the sky was filling up, I could see it now, the third day after the last transport. To the east, low on the horizon, there was a darkness that was not weather. It did not move like weather. It thickened and it spread, and some mornings it caught the light, and I could see, even at that distance, that it was made of separate things, thousands of separate things, wing on wing, and they were coming, slow and certain, the way a tide comes. And there was no transport now and nowhere to run to, and I would not have run anyhow. Pip felt them before I understood them. On the fourth day after the transport, he stopped eating. He would go to the door of the mess and stand looking east with his neck stretched high and his nostrils working, and he would make a sound I hadn't heard from him, not the keen and not the murmur, but something in between, thin and rising. And when I came to him, he leaned the whole weight of his body against my legs, which he had never done. He had given me his neck and his trust, but never his weight, and I understood that the thing on the horizon was calling to him in a way I couldn't hear, and that some part of him was answering, and that he was frightened of it and drawn to it both at once. "That's your people, isn't it?" I said to him, my hand on the warm pebbled scale of his neck. "Coming to find you." He pressed against me and made the thin rising sound. "You don't have to be afraid of them," I told him, though I was afraid of them myself, head to foot. "That's your mother out there, I'd wager. She's torn up half the coast looking for you. You'll go home. You'll grow up huge and you'll forget all about the old woman and her pot, and that's right, that's how it's meant to go. But you'll be fed when she finds you. I'll see to that. She'll not find you a bag of bones. She'll find you well." I cooked everything I had left those last days. There was no sense saving it. I made the marrow broth he loved, and I roasted what meat was in the stores, and I set it before him, all of it, more than he could eat, because I had got the one idea fixed in my head and I would not let it go. That when his mother came, that great and grieving and furious mother, she would find her son not starved, not neglected, not a thing some human hand had stolen and broken, but warm and full and easy by a stove, with an old woman fussing over whether he'd had enough. If they were going to burn me for the having of him, then by every long year I'd stood at that pot, they would burn me with his belly full. They came on the 7th morning. I was at the stove. I always was. The light came up gray and then gold over the eastern sheds, and Pip had gone to the door before dawn and would not come back, standing in the open with his neck stretched and that thin sound rising and falling in him, and I had stopped trying to coax him in. And then the gold light on the sheds went out. It went out the way a lamp goes out when a hand passes over it. The whole yard dimmed all at once, and I felt it before I looked up, a pressure, a weight of air, and a sound that I cannot fully give you, a sound like the world's largest sail filling, over and over, hundreds of them, the beating of wings so vast that each beat pushed the dust up off the ground in a ring. I went to the door, past Pip, out into the yard, and I looked up, and the sky was gone. The sky was gone, and dragons were where it had been. I have no words the right size for it. I have tried for years, and the words are always too small. They blotted out the morning. They were enormous beyond the hatchling's strangeness, beyond anything the word dragon had ever meant to me. Bodies the length of the transports, scaled in storm gray and slate and a deep bruised blue, wings that each could have roofed the mess hall. And there were so many of them that they wheeled in layers, a lower ring settling toward the yard and ranks above it and ranks above those. Up into the dark they'd made of the dawn. The wind of them flattened the tank grass and tore the tin half off the roof and drove the dust into a brown wall. And through the wall came their eyes, dozens of them, scores of them. All of that ancient and grieving fury turned down at the one-way station that hadn't run, at the one figure standing in the yard at me. And I understood with a clarity that was almost peaceful that Holloway had been right, that they were not going to land and have a conversation. That they had come for blood and answers, and they had found a human standing over the place where their lost prince's scent ran thickest, and that the next moment was very likely the last one I would have. The lowest of them, the largest, the one the others wheeled around, a dragon the deep blue-black of a storm at its heart, with a head longer than I was tall and eyes the cold gold of a winter sun, folded her wings and came down. She came down between me and the mess, and the ground took her weight with a sound like a struck drum, and the dust rolled out from her in a wave that knocked me back a step, and she lowered that great head until one cold gold eye was level with me, an arm's length away, close enough that I could see myself in it, a small gray smudge of an old woman in an apron, and the breath came out of her in a heat I felt on my face, and the heat smelled of ozone and grief and the promise of fire. She did not speak. I do not think she meant to ask me anything. I think she meant to learn the truth by the simplest means her kind had, to read the place by scent and by sight, to find her son's blood smeared on the human in front of her, and to answer it. That is what they had done at 3 waystations down the coast. That is what they had come to do at the 4th. And I will tell you what I did, because I have thought about it 1,000 times since, and I cannot tell you it was courage. I do not think it was. I think it was only that I was 63 years old and tired, and I had run out of pot to die behind, and the one thing left to me was the thing I had done for 31 years, which was to feed whoever was in front of me, frightened or grieving or furious, whoever they were. So I did not run because there was nowhere to run, and I did not beg because I had never in my life found that begging fed anyone. I turned slowly, with that great cold eye on me, and I went back to the door of the mess, and I picked up the bowl I had set there for Pip that morning, the marrow broth, still warm, and I came back out into the dust and the wind and the wings, and I held it up, the way you hold up a thing for someone to see, and I said the only words I had. "He's fed," I said. My voice was nothing in all that wind. I don't know how she heard it, but the great head went still, so I think she did. "Your son. He's fed and he's warm and there's not a mark on him. I've kept him these 11 days. I didn't take him, he came in off the storm half-starved and I fed him, that's all I know how to do. Look at him before you do anything, he's well. I made sure he'd be well when you came." And I turned my head slow toward the door of the mess, and I said, in the voice I'd used on him by the stove every night, "Pip, come here, love. Come show your mother you've had your supper." He came. He came out from where he'd pressed himself against the door frame, and he crossed the yard between us, the small dusk-blue hatchling, his claws ticking on the boards, his stubbed wings half-mantled and easy, and he did not go to her. He came to me. He came to me, and he leaned the whole warm weight of his body against my legs, the way he'd taken to doing, and he turned his amber eyes up at the enormous storm-dark mother filling the sky above us, and he made, deep in his chest, the rolling murmur he made when the broth was good, the sound of a creature that is warm and fed and not afraid and not alone. I watched it land in her. I watched the fury go out of that great cold eye. I have seen grief turn to relief in a human face 100 times across my benches, the whole storm of it breaking all at once, And I tell you it is the same in a dragon. It is exactly the same, only larger. She lowered her head the rest of the way to the ground, slow, until her vast snout was beside the little body leaning on my legs, and she breathed him in, the whole length of him, the heat of her breath stirring the dust around my feet, and the hatchling leaned off my legs and pressed his small head against the side of her great one. And the sound that came out of her then went through the boards and through my feet and up through my old bones, a sound so low and so deep that it was less a sound than a thing the ground did. And I understood it for what it was, because there is only one thing it could have been. It was a mother who had thought her child dead, finding him living. There is no language that doesn't have that sound in it somewhere. The host above us felt it. The ranks of them, wheeling in the dark they'd made, felt the Dawn Mother's sound, and the dark began to lift. They were peeling away, climbing, the diving fury of them turning to something else, and the gold morning light came back across the sheds a piece at a time as they rose off it. The fire did not come. Harrow Crossing did not burn. The Dawn Mother lifted her head and looked at me again, and the eye was not cold now. I cannot tell you it was warm. It was too old and too vast and too far from anything human to be a thing as small as warm, but the fury was gone out of it, and in its place was something I can only call attention. She was seeing me, not the smear of a human standing where her son's scent ran. Me, the old woman with the bowl. She did not kneel. I want that understood because I have heard the story told back to me with her kneeling in it, and she did not, and I would not have wanted her to. She was a queen of a host that blotted out the sky, and she did not kneel to a mess cook, and that is right and proper. What she did was this. She lowered her great head a second time level with me, and she took the bowl. She took the bowl out of my hands. Delicately, the same careful, frightened of frightening me delicacy I'd seen in her son the first night across the lean-to floor, the same gentleness bred into the whole strange line of them. She closed those terrible jaws around the rim of the bowl, soft as a hand, and she lifted it from me, and she set it down on the boards before her son, the bowl I'd filled for him that morning, and she nudged it toward him with her snout. The way you'd finish another's work. The way you'd take up the spoon from a tired cook and say, "Rest now, I have him." You did it right. He ate. The lost prince of the Stormhold flight ate the last bowl of marrow broth at Harrow Crossing while his mother stood over him and watched. And over us the host wheeled gold in the risen morning, and I stood in my apron with my empty hands and I wept, finally, the way I had not let myself weep in all the empty days, because I had got the one idea I'd fixed on. The only thing I'd wanted. She had found him well. They did not stay long. Their kind has somewhere always to be, I think, currents in them we can't feel, and the host was already turning eastward, back the way it had come, the searching over. The Dawn Mother gathered her son. He went to her at last, it was time, and he knew it, the way young things know. And he climbed the great slope of her foreleg and settled into the curve of her neck where her scale made a hollow that fit him. And I saw that he had a place there, a place worn for him, that he was going home to. But before she rose, she did one more thing, and it is the thing I have carried longest. She turned her head back to me with her son tucked into her neck, and she made a sound, not the deep ground sound of her grief and her joy, but a different one, shorter, deliberate, 3 rising notes, and she held my eyes while she made it. And then she made it again, slower, and I understood, the way you understand across the strangeness, that she was giving me something. A word, a name. Mine or hers or the name of the thing I'd done, I have never known which, and it doesn't matter because I knew what it was for. It was the sound you make when a thing is to be remembered. She was setting me down somewhere I could not see, in whatever long memory a host like that keeps, so that I would not be lost. So that the old woman at the crossing who fed the prince would not, herself, go hungry into the dark of forgetting. Then she rose, and her son with her, and the wind of her wings flattened me back against the doorframe. And she climbed up into the gold morning and took her place at the head of the host, and they went east, all of them, ranks on ranks, until the sky was only sky again and the dust settled, and the tank cables hummed and Harrow Crossing was quiet. Pip looked back. Once. From the curve of his mother's neck far up, a small dusk blue shape against the gold, he turned his head and found me where I stood in the yard, and I lifted my hand to him, the way I'd lifted it to 1,000 leaving faces off 1,000 ramps, and then they were too far, and the gold took them, and he was gone. I went back inside. I scraped the pot. There is always the pot. The authority transports came back eventually, when the host's course was reported clear, and the way stations along the coast began to count what was left of themselves. Holloway was on the first of them, and he came across the yard at a run, which I had never seen him do, and he stopped in front of me and looked at the mess hall still standing and the shed still standing and the old woman still standing in her apron, and he could not say anything at all. "You'll want feeding," I told him. "The lot of you sit down." I have thought in the long years since about why she spared us. Not for me. I'm not such a fool as to think a queen of the sky turned a host of hundreds aside for the sake of one cook's good opinion. She spared us because her son was well. Because when the whole grieving fury of her came down out of the sky to read the truth of the place, the truth she read was a child fed and warm and unafraid, leaning on the legs of the one who'd kept him. The kindness was already done before she ever arrived. I didn't talk her out of the fire. The broth did. 11 days of broth, carried out to a frightened hatchling behind the flour drums by an old woman who would not leave, had already written the answer she came looking for, long before she came. People underestimate that. They think you have to be grand to turn a thing aside. They think kindness has to be a speech, or a stand, or a great brave act in the last moment. But the last moment is only ever the sum of all the small ones before it. I did not save Harrow crossing in the yard that morning with a bowl held up against the wind. I saved it on the 6th night in the lean-to, when I tore a heel of bread and laid it on the dirt and drew my hand back and waited. Everything after was only that, carried forward. I am very old now. My hands have gone past leather to paper and I do my cooking sitting down. But I still cook, here at the crossing, for the families that pass through on their way to somewhere else, and I still carry something in my apron pocket out of habit, and on the cold nights when the wind comes up out of the east and hums in the tank cables, I go out into the yard and I look up at the dark, and I am not afraid of it the way I once was. There are things in that dark that know my name. A mother set it down somewhere safe, in 3 rising notes, so that it would not be lost. And sometimes on the clearest nights I think I hear it far up and far off, a thin sound rising and falling, the sound a young one makes when it's looking for someone. And I lift my hand to the dark, the way you'd lift it to a leaving face off a ramp, and I say, lo, the way I said it every night by the stove, "There you are, love. There you are. I kept your supper warm."